Mr. Ball, European Union speaks always about the significance of European cities and regions in this strategy for recovery, growth, employment. But is this just a rhetoric, or it really gives the means, the financial means, of course, and the instruments to apply this strategy and this policy?
Well, in a sense, there are two different questions there. It's not rhetoric in the sense that cities make up 70% of the population of Europe. And in that sense, if you cannot get growth in the cities, you don't get growth amongst member states, and you don't get growth across the EU as a whole. So cities are important, and therefore we've got to get the economic conditions right in cities. We've got to get growth in cities. Whether the financial means are sufficient is another question. Certainly for many of us, and I'm talking here about the cities in the UK, which is of course where I come from, the financial means available from the structural funds is sometimes the only monies that we can access. And therefore they are vital to many of us. And I think that situation is not particularly different across the EU. That the structural funds in particular, but also the FP7 funds, what are now going to be Horizon 2020 in the new programme, they are very important to helping the growth of our local economies. And often it's about balancing out the economy. I certainly know my own city has been in transition for 20 or 30 years now. And that access to European structural and non-structural funds has been very, very important in trying to help us balance out the economy and move the economy forward in new sectors of employment.
And is it successful, this transition?
Well, sometimes I get asked that question, and when I quote unemployment figures, they say, well, obviously it's not succeeded. I look at it this way: if it wasn't for some of those funds that we'd access to, the situation would be even worse now. So my answer to the question is yes. And I can point to successes in a number of different areas. But when you add it all together, the economy has still been through a mincer, if you like, and what you gain is often offset elsewhere. But my answer is most certainly yes. Without the access to those European funds, I think the economy in my city, the economy in many cities across Europe, would be worse than it is today.
But in general, all this new strategy of 2020 is more focused on the local and regional level, comparing to the Lisbon strategy. So do we have a change?
Well, I see
philosophy
no, I don't think it is particularly a change of philosophy. I see the Europe 2020 strategy as setting an umbrella for Europe as a whole. It's trying to suggest where those priority areas should be. I think what you see in member state terms is a member state economic plan, if you like, which when you take them across the member states of Europe, aggregates into Europe 2020. And I think if you look down below at cities and regions, what you should see is a reflection of where the member state wants to take its economic plan, where Horizon 2020 takes that for Europe as a whole. If you aggregated the cities and regions across Europe, you would get the member state economic plans, you would get Horizon 2020. So I don't think there is a dissociation between them, and it's a way of, I think, by adopting Europe 2020 is a way of directing funds, European funds, into specific measures.
As you know, in Greece we are in a huge crisis. Athens is in a crisis. With your experience, do you have any remarks to make for the Greek case? Do you have to give some advice also?
Well, I go back a number of years, and I know it is now, 30 years since the last major recession hit my city. But when we were going through the recession of the 1980s, the early 1980s, in my city of Birmingham, we lost 200,000 jobs in one city, my own city. And that was a period over 5 or 6 years. More jobs lost in my city.
What percentage?
The unemployment rose from less than 10% to 25% and over. in certain areas of the city, unemployment was in excess of 50%. That level of jobs lost in my city was greater than the jobs lost in the whole of Scotland and the whole of Wales put together. So if I'm to compare the situation here in Athens and across many of the Greek cities, it is perhaps no worse than what I experienced 30 years ago. And we came out of it, but we had to replan the economy. We had to change the economy of the city. Now, it doesn't happen overnight, and it takes a long time to pull unemployment levels down. But it's a question of setting a long-term plan, and it's a question then of trying to access the funds to develop that plan, to take that plan forward. I'm sure Athens can do it, I'm sure the other cities of Greece can do it, but it's not something that's going to happen tomorrow.
Okay. Anyway, tomorrow the debate in this conference is the future of Europe. Are you optimist with all this crisis going on?
I have to be an optimist. To be other than an optimist would make the situation even worse. It is, look, Europe, the European economy is struggling. We all know that. And it does make it more difficult for individual member states and individual member state economies to pull out of the recession. And that's certainly true of the UK. We seem to now to be in a period of growth, but that growth is possibly being restricted by much of the rest of Europe still being economically flat, if you like. But I have to remain optimistic because I think the European strategy is the correct one. We have to get jobs in. We have to particularly address the youth unemployment issues, and there are a number of measures there. Indeed, there is new finance available for youth employment measures. So, but it's not a question of Europe delivering in that sense. If there is no vision and long-term strategy in the cities, then in fact, since cities, in my argument, are the base of the economy, if there is no long-term vision and no long-term strategy in the cities driving these agendas, then in fact things are not going to happen.
And Britain will remain in this European Union?
Well, I sincerely hope so. Just as there was lots of arguments a year or so ago about the Greece not being perhaps...
The Brexit.
Yeah. Then I was very much for Greece staying as part of the economic union and the monetary union. I am still very much in favour of Britain staying in Europe. It will be good for Britain, and it will be good for the rest of the EU.